John Street. I'm the managing editor at Campus Reform. With us today, I have Brett Barbin. He is a University of Chicago student. He is the student government member who introduced legislation in his student government that would prohibit or ban the use of mandatory student fees going toward student abortions on campus. Brett, thanks for joining us. It's great to have you with us today.
Hi, John. Thanks for having me on.
So I just want to dive right into it. So you introduced this legislation basically saying that there are students on campus who are personally and morally opposed to the practice of abortion, and whether it should go on campus or not is a separate issue from whether students should be forced to fund that procedure. So can you just talk a little bit about some of the backlash that you got once you introduced that legislation and were the only one to vote in favor of it?
Absolutely, John. You hit the nail right on the head. I introduced this legislation to make sure that our mandatory student life fees that are a part of our tuition don't go towards the funding of abortion. Our student life fees are typically used for social, cultural, educational, and other types of activities. And they've really never been used until about a year ago for the funding of abortion. They was never really intended to be for their use until our student government decided that it wanted to use part of its share of the student life fee for that purpose. So the incoming president of student government posted on Facebook that she believes abortions are a good thing and that her committee proudly supports and funds abortions. And a few students reached out to me with concerns about that message in the incoming administration. And so they decided to ask if I would be willing to write some legislation in order to put some guardrails up on student government and its ability to fund abortions. Some of the backlash I received after proposing this bill, which I will say that I believe was a compromise measure between people who think that this committee should have a very expansive mandate. It's intended to fund projects for low-income marginalized students and is relatively confidential. And those who think that their student life fees should not be used for the murder of the unborn. I decided to draft what is at the federal level known as the Hyde Amendment, and the Hyde Amendment prohibits federal tax dollars from all of Americans from being coerced to pay for abortions. And we believe that this is the right compromise because the issue of abortion is very divisive, and there's passionate people on both sides, and one side thinks that at least abortion is murder, and so we wouldn't want to actually compel those people to pay for the murder of others. Some of the backlash I received online, and I will say that inside the room it was relatively civil. We had a relatively productive conversation with some of the people who were opposed to it, even though they stood in the back of the room with wire hangers, lots of protest signs, lots of expletive-laden signs with my name in it. But online it was truly vitriolic. I got some death threats. Some people were setting up PSAs for people to track me down, hunt me down, and beat me up. There was an egging that happened outside of the room. And in the aftermath, ironically, a lot of people began donating to this committee, Planned Parenthood, and the Chicago Abortion Fund in my name. I'm receiving a lot of those emails, almost $1,000 in my name. And what's so ironic about it is that if we have all these people who believe very strongly about an expansive access to abortion, why aren't they using their funds? Why are they forcing other students to pay for the abortions of others? They're just reaffirming my position.
Given that you were the only student in the student government to vote in favor of the legislation that you introduced, and given that you will be graduating in a couple of weeks, are you concerned that next year in student government that there will not be a pro-life voice there?
Perhaps not in student government, but I think that the campus membership is very involved in the issue. There are certain RSOs on campus who are concerned, members of those, the ones who reached out to me. And so they will continue to advocate for this reasonable compromise, or at least some sort of solution to this issue, because it's truly irresponsible for our student government to be using its money to pay for abortions when in other departments that use the student life fee, for instance, student health and counseling services, they explicitly do not fund abortions using student life fees.
So the University of Chicago is known for its Chicago statement, what many regard as the gold standard when it comes to campus free speech. Do you think that this measure of essentially forcing students to pay for abortions, whether they agree with the procedure or not, personally and morally or religiously, do you think that is a violation of the spirit of the Chicago Statement?
I'm not sure if it's a violation of the Chicago Statement. I think that there are much more experienced lawyers in the law school who'd be willing to look into that on free speech and principles. I will say, though, that on our Chicago principles, which we stand very firmly behind and I am a big supporter of, it was disappointing to see many of the students on campus who were willing to, in my mind, infringe on those principles by advocating for physical violence against me and other members who spoke up on behalf of this issue. And at the same time, though, I fully recognize that as a representative in college council, I'm going to receive lots of dissatisfaction from people who disagreed with me, and I'm more than willing to take that. That's the entire purpose of the marketplace of ideas. And so I heard them out and actually genuinely, sincerely am interested in hearing from people who are opposed to the legislation and why they're opposed. And actually, when I start to have a conversation with people, they say, hey, I might be pro-choice, but they're open-minded, and so they're willing to at least consider the idea that they shouldn't be forcing other students to pay for other students' abortions. It really should be a matter of personal responsibility, or in fact, there are other private funds and resources available for those students.
I want to move back to the death threats that you've gotten, that you say you've gotten online. Have any of those, to your knowledge, come from students or anyone affiliated with the university?
Yes, they were students at the university.
Do you know if the university is looking into those threats and if they're doing anything about that, any potential consequences for students who issued those threats?
I'm not aware of any, no.
And have you been reached out to by the university just to, regarding your recent interviews that you've done on this topic, or just to ensure your own personal safety by the university? Has the university reached out to you in any capacity?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm in consultation about these threats, and we're thinking about next steps and what could be done.
All right, and then you had mentioned that one of the student leaders in student government had actually promoted the concept of abortion. Given that student leaders and student government are supposed to represent the ideals of the student population at large, regardless of their values or their beliefs, do you think it's appropriate for a student leader to advocate for an abortion, and like he or she did?
Well, certainly it's appropriate on a campus like this to be open in all different types of ideas, as long as you're talking about them as philosophical concepts. For instance, there are RSOs, which student government funds, that bring speakers who are very outwardly pro-abortion to campus to talk about it. That's perfectly fine. The issue is paying for the procedure in which many students believe a murder is taken. So if a student government leader wants to express her opinion that abortions are a good thing, it was reiterated in the meeting that abortions are amazing, that's perfectly fine. The issue is the fact that we're now using our money in order to actually promote the procedure. And so we've really gone beyond the bounds. We've gone from thinking about things theoretically, thinking about things as a debate between ideas, into actually acting on those things. It changes the matter of the debate, for sure.
Is it different, though, for the leader of student government at large as opposed to the leader of, say, a student organization that by its very nature, it may be, in favor of abortion, whereas that club, those students presumably are all in favor of abortion, and so those leaders are representing those members at large by advocating for abortion, whereas a student government leader is voicing pro-abortion opinions when not all students on campus agree on the topic of abortion. Is there any difference there for you?
I agree that there's a higher responsibility once you're elevated all the way up to the presidency of student government. You're supposed to be a representative of all the people. You should be taking into consideration all of the ideas. And so while I acknowledge that even myself as just a member of college council, which is like the representative body in our student government, that the majority opinion on campus might be pro-choice. However, there are still people who are in the minority who deserve to be represented, who deserve to have their sincerely held beliefs actually expressed within their government. We can't simply ignore the fact that a significant minority of students on campus believe that abortion is murder. When that's such a serious charge, we have to really take that into consideration. And so I would ask, and this is why we introduced this legislation, that leaders within our student government take these things into consideration and be very careful and choice with their words. And it was really disheartening to hear that abortions are amazing, abortions are a good thing. That was truly what prompted this legislation.
So the University of Chicago in 2017 received $308,002,000 in federal research funding. That's money that President Donald Trump has threatened to withhold from colleges and universities that don't adequately protect free speech. Do you think that by the university and student government forcing students who do not agree with abortion to pay for such procedures, do you think that's a violation of free speech, and should that federal research funding be at stake?
Yeah, I think it's something that the university administration should definitely be aware of. Hopefully by this vote, they understand that this is actually what student government is doing with its student life fees, and they might look into the matter a bit more, because I certainly know that those hundreds of thousands of dollars that the university receives in research grants are extremely important to the university. We're very much a research-based university, and if we were ever to lose those kinds of NSF grants or NHS grants, it would be very much a horrible thing to happen to the university. So is it a violation of free speech principles? I think there are a lot of really well-educated, knowledgeable legal scholars at the law school here who would be able to answer the question a lot better than I can, and probably argue on behalf of a case like mine. But I would say that it definitely is threatening over the minds with our student life fees.
All right, Brett, thank you so much for joining us. Brett Barbin, who is the student government member at the University of Chicago. He introduced legislation to ban students who do not, or ban the use of mandatory student fees from being used for abortions. So, Brett, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me on, John.
Hi, it's Lawrence Jones with Campus Reform. If you like that video you just saw, you can donate right here to help us make more of them. And if you want to subscribe, click right here.